So in the past 24 to 72 hours, everybody from myself to Clownfish TV, Geeks and Gamers, The Park Place, Double Toasted, you name it. A lot of people have been talking about the Steamboat Willie situation and, that cartoon, those early 1928 designs of Mickey and Minnie and to an extension Pete and all that going into public domain. A lot of people have been bringing up potentially the Plain Crazy and Galloping Gaucho designs that also came out around the same time, going into public domain as well. Well, one of the things that is brought up in some of these discussions here on YouTube, various podcasts, articles like Variety and such, one of the things that's brought up is, the fact that Disney has trademarked the Steamboat Willie design. Now, you might ask yourself, well, if Disney trademarked it, what was the point of it going into public domain where anybody could use it as they please? What was the point of it going in there if Disney's going to pretty much prevent usage of it, period? Well, that's where it gets a little tricky, if you will. Because you see, unlike Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, the people behind that and the Blood and Honey sequel, they're basically going off of the designs and the first literate works of, the person behind the Winnie the Pooh stories, basically the first appearances of the characters. That's what they're going off of. And thus, the people behind Blood and Honey and Blood and Honey 2, and then, of course, the various other, non-Disney Winnie the Pooh stories, they're able to get away with it a lot easier because they're basically saying this is a different Winnie the Pooh, not Disney's Winnie the Pooh. They're basically saying Disney can have their version and probably the most recognizable version, but we're going to go and show you different, incarnations that can exist simultaneously. And that's why they're able to get away with it, because they're basing their ideas off the first literal works of Winnie the Pooh. That's what they're doing. End of discussion. But when it comes to Mickey Mouse and Steamboat Willie, that's a different story. Because you see, when Disney sells Winnie the Pooh merchandise, they're selling the Winnie the Pooh merchandise that has them in the red shirt and stuff. And that's it. They're selling their versions, their designs, their take on Winnie the Pooh. Disney, when it comes to Steamboat Willie, that's when things get complicated, because it's like, yeah, you could use the Steamboat Willie, Plain Crazy, Galloping Gaucho designs of Mickey and Minnie and Pete to an extent, as much as you want, but you have to change them. You have to modify them. You have to basically, find a way to where, people will see that, yes, this is who we all know it is, but said character has been changed up to a point that the people that own him won't come after you. And that's where it gets tricky, because the other thing you have to realize is when you do that, you either cannot mention him as who he is, or you got to go by the name of the cartoon as the name of the character. So in other words, you either got to just not mention that it's Mickey Mouse and let people realize, oh, it is Mickey Mouse, the earliest version, or you got to call him Steamboat Willie. And that's what some people feel that Simon Phillips and Brit Flick's Mickey's Mousetrap might come into, some legal trouble. And I mentioned this in my Topics on My Mind live stream yesterday, that basically what they're going to probably have to do to avoid any lawsuit, if they face it, is to basically either reshoot certain scenes where they have a hat added to the mouse mask that they have Simon Phillips, who's playing the slasher in this film, have a hat added to the mouse mask and everything, to distinguish that it is Steamboat Willie, or modify the mask a little bit to where it looks a little bit more damaged than usual, or they have to get or they have to utilize some kind of CGI animation technology to add the hat, or secondly, basically, they have to change the name of the title. Because, yeah, some might say, oh, legally they'll be fine because they put an apostrophe, between the name Mickey and the letter S, and they separated it from mouse, the saying mouse trap. Yeah, they did do that, and credit to them. But still, that might not help them because Disney, they have a peripheral of lawyers. They have a peripheral of lawyers on the legal team, and some of those lawyers, I guarantee you, will skim through certain things like, Mickey's Mousetrap with a fine-tooth comb to see if there's anything that infringes on their trademark. And if they do, then that project may be shelved indefinitely. So what they have to do at BritFlix and Simon Phillips, what they have to do is they have to really either change the name of it or they have to reshoot. They basically have to hold it back a lot longer and probably release it in time for Halloween instead of in the spring. So that way they make sure that, they can avoid any legal action. Period. But the one question, though, a lot of people have is, despite all that trickery, is how are they able to even make these projects a reality? How are they able to work on them? And I think, that's where, basically knowing people in law, like a law firm, like maybe you have a law firm you go to, or they go to, or maybe they know people in law, or studying law, or working in law, they're able to go to these places and these people to get advice of, okay, what can we do and what can we not do, so that way we get this thing off the ground. Like, what is safe to use and what is safe not to use. And also, I guarantee they may have signed agreement contracts that state that they cannot show any screenshots, any clips or trailers, teasers, not share any synopsis information until the beginning of the year. That way, once they get to that beginning of the year, they'll have a little bit more free range because what they're working on, basing it on what is now public domain, will be okay to share. But again, even that gets a little tricky. In fact, I was watching the Park Place podcast this morning. They uploaded a clip from their podcast today, and they basically stated in that podcast that somebody, basically the live stream got demonetized, got taken down because of the Steamboat Willie situation. Yeah, it basically got hit by some unknown, they didn't say who, they said it was some kind of like unknown claimer, but I think we all know who that unknown claimer is. It was Disney, but they're not straight out saying that, and that's one thing, unfortunately, you have to give Disney credit for. They basically know how to, when they need to, they know how to hide their tracks. They know how to make it, less avoidable that it's them that's claiming certain things and not somebody else, not some troll and everything. And this person apparently couldn't get, the stream back, couldn't get the monetization for that stream back or anything. It was pretty much gone. And again, this is where things get tricky because Disney, they have a crack team of people looking into a lot of these things. And this crack team will also be on, on the ball, if you will, to essentially call upon the peripheral of lawyers in the legal team, those that I even mentioned that will look through things with a fine-tooth comb, to basically tell them, hey, when we give you the signal, get ready to pounce. And they will. They will. Because, again, it's one of these situations that's very tricky, and you have to be careful how you maneuver around it. That's what you got to do. You got to be very, very careful about that. You got to basically be like, okay, I want to use these early 1928 designs of Mickey and Minnie, in a project, but how can I do it that doesn't get me in trouble? See, that is what's, that right there is what really is going to be on the minds of a lot of people that have projects in the works right now. Because you can't tell me, because there's a whole peripheral, there's a whole list. No joke. Geeks and Gamers brought this up. There was a whole list. Frank Hill, Frank even sent me the list as well. But there's a whole list, of projects, based around Steamboat Willie. And they're all indie projects. The kind of indie projects that'd be straight to home video, like straight to Blu-ray, DVD, straight to streaming, you name it. Straight to Tubi, T-U-B-I, Tubi, it's straight to those platforms. And so on, straight to the Shutter platform, you name it. Those are the kind of projects that are being worked on. They are. Those are the kind of projects being worked on, and you can't tell me that the people working on them or getting ready to work on them are not reading what's going on right now and being like, okay, we're going to have to be very particular of how we do this. We got to be very careful of how we do this. Because they know that if they do something that basically feels like it's infringing on the trademark, they could get in trouble. So they got to be very, very careful. Now, I know some of you might say, well, if this is the case, what was the point of Disney even allowing it in public domain? Why didn't they just retain the copyright? And that's a good question in itself. Like, if trademark is going to prevent people from really going all out the way they're hoping for, then what was the point? And I think the point that Disney is trying to put out there with allowing Steamboat Willie to go into public domain is to see how gullible a lot of people are. They want to see how gullible and how egotistic a lot of creators, indie filmmakers and game developers are to think and believe, oh, we'll be able to get away with this, and then find out, oh shit, we can't get away with that. That's why they're doing it. They're basically saying, oh yeah, you can upload Steamboat Willie on YouTube and on VENMO and all these other places all you want. Yay, more power to you. But guess what? You can't do as much as you think you can. And what's funny is, you look at what Disney's doing, and damn well, excuse my language, God, damn well that you got these other corporations that are going to do the same thing. Bugs Bunny is getting ready to go into the public domain soon. Porky Pig is going to go into public domain soon. Daffy Duck into public domain soon. Superman in the early to mid 30s, public domain, mid 30s. Mid 2030s, I should say, Batman and Wonder Woman go into public domain. You cannot tell me that Warner Brothers right now, knowing what's going on, hearing the news about Steamboat Willie and everything, you cannot tell me that they're not coming up with ideas to trademark these characters, or at least these early designs. Because that's the other catch as well. When those characters go into public domain, you can only use those designs only. You can only use those interpretations only. Nothing more. In other words, with Superman, the Superman you would have to be able to use when he goes into public domain is the one that first appeared in Action Comics #1. The one that basically actually would leap. And I'm talking jump, not fly and everything, but leap. Just go boing, boing, that kind of Superman. You'd have to use it to where he's not, basically you would have to use Superman in a way to where he's not utilized as you know him now. And that's a fact. You would have to use him in a way that he's not known for now. That's how you'd be able to use him. But again, that might be tricky as well. Because Warner Brothers, DC, they may, trademark that version. I mean, somebody, I think it was Geeks and Gamers, said that there's a good possibility, because they heard rumors that with James Gunn running, the DC and the reboot of the DCU movieverse, that basically there's been talk of maybe incorporating that first appearance of Superman, in some capacity, like maybe taking a page out of what Disney's done with Steamboat Willie. And the same could be said for Wonder Woman and Batman. That way it would ensure that, yeah, it's in public domain, but it's not as easy to access and utilize as you think. So, So that might be something that, people have to have to be careful of. I mean, in fact, if you think about it, when they did that one little short for Superman's 75th, birthday or anniversary, they used that image. So pretty much they've already trademarked it. They've already trademarked it when you think about it. It's basically the one thing overall, when you look at what's going on with Steamboat Willie being in public domain, and you look at all these other projects going into public domain, the one thing that's going to hold a lot of independent creators back from making movies, making, games, and so on, is the trademark. It's going to be the trademark. That is what's going to hold you back. So you got to be careful of how you utilize it. Some people have said, well, if we're going to use Superman, we're going to have to take the S off. You might have to do that. Same with Batman. You're going to have to take off the iconic Batman logo on the chest and be like, okay, now we got to go do something different. Same with Wonder Woman. You may have to alter her design, but, what do you alter it to? Do you alter it to her new 52 design? What do you do? It gets complicated when it comes to these established, recognizable, iconic IPs when they go into public domain, because unlike a literal work, easy for me to say, of something like, let's say, Peter Pan, which also went into public domain this year, basically, unlike Peter Pan, where you could do whatever you want with that, the first iteration, when it comes to, like I said, these iconic IPs, it's a lot trickier. Because Peter Pan, the earliest iterations of Peter Pan, Winnie the Pooh, Cinderella, and all them, they have no trademark. The original works that some of our classic films are based on by Disney, the original works that are based on have no trademarks. They don't. So they're easy to access. I mean, if I wanted to, I could do a Cinderella story. I could write up a Cinderella story to where she has basically the fairy godmother turns her into a girl that's made of slime, that's able to shapeshift into whoever or whatever she wants to be, to go and enjoy the ball, and then melt down into a puddle of goop to get home before midnight, or something like that. I could do that if I want to with the original iteration of Cinderella, and nobody could stop me. Nobody could stop me. The same with let's say Alice in Wonderland. I could add in a scene when she's in Wonderland where she enters a realm where she turns into a slime girl and she has fun shape-shifting and melting and all that. I could do that. And no one would be able to stop me. You see, the reason being is because none of those have trademarks. None of those original works have trademarks. And also because they're in the public domain. The only iterations I would have to worry about that would get me in trouble is the ones done by corporations like Disney. Like, let's say I wanted to base something and make it official of, okay, I'm going to make this Alice in Wonderland remake animated-wise where I'm going to add in this scene and da-da-da-da. That would get me in trouble. Like, let's say with the Little Mermaid, the one that really kickstarted the Renaissance era in animation for Disney. Let's say I decided, with the original literal work of The Little Mermaid, let's say I wanted to basically, instead of having her turn into foam and all that, she just turns into water, merges with the sea, and she becomes one with it, and she's able to shapeshift into a water liquidy, slime girl that could also become solidified, as flesh and blood if she wanted to. So that way she could be with her love interest or whoever she'd fall in love with. If I wanted to do that based on the first iteration, the very first iteration of the original story, I can do that. Yeah. I can even do the same thing with, the Snow Queen, which Frozen is based on. If I wanted to say, okay, I'm going to create my version of the Snow Queen, which is similar but not the same, similar to Frozen, but not the same, to where the Snow Queen, decides to give her little snow friend, a gift to where she'll turn herself into a snow woman, and then they get it on kind of deal. And then they melt into a puddle because they got so hot, and then they fuse together. I could do that. I could do that basically because I'd be basing it off the original works. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? Because those original works are not trademarked. They're not. The Grimm family, the descendants of the original author, the Hans Christian Andersen family, the Grimm's family, whatever, the descendants didn't trademark them. Now, they still could, but they haven't because they want everybody to have access to them. And that's the difference between what's going on with Steamboat Willie. The Steamboat Willie version of Mickey Mouse. That's been trademarked. So it makes things a little bit more trickier. And what people have to do is find a way around that and give credit where it's due. With Infestation Origins, a.k.a. Infestations 88, or Infestation 88, Infestation Origin, give it credit, where it's due, because they basically utilize the design, but they've changed it up enough to where it's like, yeah, it's Steamboat Willie Mickey Mouse, but it's not the Disney one. So give them credit there. Give credit to the guy that's working on the new one or planning to work on the new Steamboat Willie horror slasher film this spring. Because even though the poster shows that version having gloves, the iconic Mickey Mouse gloves, they're tattered up and everything to it's like, okay, that's different enough. But when it comes to Mickey's mousetrap, like I said, and everybody else is pointing this out, that might be where things get a little bit more complicated. Things might get a little bit more tricky. Because, even though they might be able to get away with it because they say, hey, look, it's based on Steamboat Willie and we're showing in the trailer that it's based on that. Even though they could say, yeah, by the way, Steamboat doesn't wear his hat all the time, in the cartoon. He's always just regular. They could actually justifiably argue that and probably win that argument, but it's their title that they would have to change. So again, like I said earlier, they'd have to either change the title, change the synopsis, the name of the character, or basically they'd have to do some reshoots or add some CGI in there, putting the little hat on and everything that, basically helps prevent them from getting in legal trouble. That's pretty much what they would have to do. But, we'll see what happens. It's kind of a touch and go situation when it comes to that. But everything else, like I said, you think right now that the people that are planning all these Steamboat Willie, horror slasher film, comedy, adult film, softcore, projects, you don't think they're not being careful about what they do? I guarantee upon hearing what's going on right now, they probably are. They probably are. Like I said prior, I think I may have said this, in a live stream. Yeah, I did say this in a live stream, I think. It's like if, let's say they want to take the 1928 version of Minnie Mouse from Plain Crazy, Steamboat Willie, and Gallopin' Gaucho, or one of those two that came out in, one of those two that came out in 28 along with Steamboat Willie. Let's say they wanted to take that Minnie Mouse and say, okay, we want to make a short CGI Minnie Mouse adult film or adult short film feature where she's having lesbian sex with an OC character. She's having lesbian sex and everything, and she melts into a puddle because of the heat, on top of her lover. If they wanted to do that, they could, but they'd have to be very careful. They'd have to be very, meticulous, if you will, on how they would make that happen. They'd have to be careful about that. If that's one of the projects they want to work on in the future. Because basically, they'd be utilizing a public domain version of Minnie, but they'd have to be very careful about it. They'd have to be. So, when it comes to Steamboat Willie and other future projects being in public domain or going into public domain, it does free up anybody to utilize them, but what keeps them from fully going all out at the end of the day is trademark. That's what it is. It's trademark. And they have to be careful about that. So like I said, in the next decade or so, if somebody wants to do a Superman, horror film or whatever, they'd have to really be particular of how they use Superman from Action Comics #1. They'd have to be very careful about that. But yeah, that is one thing that if it changes, if the law says, hey, once something goes into public domain, you no longer have the trademark on it, unless something like that passes, into law in the future, which it could, then, right now, trademark is the only thing that really makes things very, complicated for any indie creators when it comes to, public domain works of corporate, entities, that, studios like Disney and Warner Brothers owns. It makes things a little bit more trickier, if you catch my drift. But let me know what your thoughts are. How do you view this? How do you view this? Do you think it's pointless if something is trademarked that, it should be allowed in the public domain and the company should just retain the rights? Or do you think people need to actually be very careful and find ways to get around that? And also, do you think maybe down the line we might get a ruling that, from Congress and the House that basically says in law, that gets signed into law? Do you think there will become a time to where, when it's signed in, if something's signed into law that says, hey, once something goes into public domain, you also lose the trademark, for that iteration? Do you think something like that will happen? Let me know in the comment section down below, as well as in the live chat during this premiere. Like the video, and until next time, guys, I am out.